It was the winter of 1911, and the Pacific Northwest of America lay under a low and colorless sky. The fir trees of Kitsap County, in the state of Washington, stood dark and still against the gray. The town of Olalla sat quietly upon a peninsula of cold water and dense forest, its residents going about their days with little reason to imagine that their small community would soon be known across 2 continents. The era was one of great and complicated faith. Faith in progress, faith in science, and, for a certain class of educated man and woman, faith in the curative powers of nature over those of conventional medicine. Newspapers and journals carried advertisements for sanitariums, fasting cures, and hydrotherapeutic retreats. It was a time when the boundary between treatment and harm was poorly drawn, and those who suffered chronic ailments were often willing to travel considerable distances for the promise of restored health. Into this landscape, a woman had placed herself with considerable deliberation. She wore the authority of her profession like a coat that did not quite fit, yet nobody standing in her reception room seemed to notice the gap. She opened the curtains each morning. She wrote names into her ledger, and the counting continued, slow and quiet, as the winter deepened around Wilderness Heights. Linda Laura Burfield was born on the 18th of December, 1867, in Carver County, Minnesota, the eldest of 7 children born to Montgomery and Susanna Burfield. The records describe her as an intelligent and studious child, though those who knew her in later years would speak also of an overbearing quality, a certainty in her own conclusions that admitted little room for doubt. In 1885, at the age of 18, she married a man named Edwin Peary, with whom she had 2 children. The marriage did not endure. After the couple divorced, Linda relocated to Minneapolis, and it was there that her preoccupations began to take the shape of a vocation. She became absorbed in the writings of Dr. Edward Hooker Dewey, an American physician who was regarded as a pioneer in the practice of therapeutic fasting. Though Linda Burfield possessed no formal medical qualifications, none whatsoever, she absorbed his theories with the conviction of a convert, and in time she established herself as a practitioner of alternative medicine. She believed that excessive consumption of food was the cause of most human illness, and that fasting would remove toxins from the body, correct its imbalances, and allow it to heal from within. It was a philosophy that carried its own internal logic, and she delivered it with an assurance that many found persuasive. By 1902, a patient had already died under her care in Minneapolis. The coroner determined that the cause of death was starvation. The police investigated. It was also noted that jewelry belonging to the deceased had gone missing, and relatives suspected Linda of having taken it. She was interviewed. The matter was reviewed. And then, in the manner of many such cases from this period, the matter was set aside. There was insufficient evidence to prosecute on the question of the jewelry, and because she held no medical license, she could not formally be charged in connection with her practice. The encounter with the law left no apparent mark upon her. She continued, she wrote, she treated, and when her husband Samuel Crisman Hazzard, a man of military schooling, failed marriages, and a considerable appetite for drink, was released from prison in 1906, having served 2 years for bigamy, the 2 of them together departed Minneapolis for the state of Washington, where, as she understood it, the legal landscape offered considerably more room. In Olalla, on the Kitsap Peninsula, Linda Hazzard acquired a small property she named Wilderness Heights. Her intention was to construct a sanitarium upon it. In the meantime, she established a practice in Seattle, traveling daily between the city and her rural holding. Washington State, through a legal arrangement that grandfathered certain practitioners of alternative medicine, permitted her to obtain a license to practice, despite the complete absence of any formal qualification. The license was granted. The practice opened. Patients came. They came because they suffered. They came because conventional medicine had not helped them, or because they held sincere philosophical convictions about the virtues of natural treatment, or because they had read her book, Fasting for the Cure of Disease, published in 1908, and found its arguments persuasive. Some came from nearby, others travelled very considerable distances. In January 1908, a Norwegian woman named Daisy Maud Haglund presented herself at the practice. Linda Hazzard recommended that she fast for 50 days. Before the fast was completed, in February of that year, Mrs. Haglund died. The official cause of death was recorded as stomach cancer. In the same year, a woman named Ida Wilcox also died under Linda Hazzard's care. The practice continued. In 1909, two further patients, Blanche Tyndall and Viola Heaton, died while under her supervision. In 1910, a civil engineer named Earl Edward Erdman began treatment with Mrs. Hazzard in the first days of February. He kept a diary. His entries record, in plain and diminishing handwriting, the precise rations he was permitted. Strained tomato broth twice daily, the juice of 2 small oranges, and nothing more. He noted dizziness. He noted pain in his right side. He noted that his eyes had become yellow-streaked and red. On the 28th of March, 1910, Earl Edward Erdman died at Seattle General Hospital of starvation. He had been under her care for less than 2 months. The Seattle Daily Times placed the matter on its front page. The headline read, "Woman MD kills another patient." The practice continued. Men and women still came. A former Washington state legislator named Lewis Ellsworth Rader was transferred to Wilderness Heights and died there. An Englishman named Ivan Flux, who had come to Washington to purchase a ranch, placed himself in her care. After 53 days of fasting, he died. When his family received word, he had less than $100 remaining to his name. The practice continued, and the name spread. Starvation Heights. It was an advertisement in a newspaper that brought the sisters to her. Dorothea and Clare Williamson were English women of means, residing at the Empress Hotel in Victoria, British Columbia, when they encountered a notice for Linda Hazzard's book and the treatments offered at Wilderness Heights. The sisters were, by the account of those who knew them, constitutionally inclined to believe themselves unwell, and they held sincere interest in alternative therapies. They ordered the book. They wrote for further information, and in February of 1911, they travelled to Seattle. The sanitarium had not yet been completed. Linda Hazzard received them at her office in the Northern Bank and Trust building. She installed them in an apartment on Seattle's Capitol Hill and presented them with a treatment plan. The plan consisted primarily of small quantities of vegetable soup served twice daily, supplemented by prolonged sessions administered in a covered bathtub. The canvas supports placed, it was said, to prevent a patient from falling should she lose consciousness during treatment. After 2 months, the sisters were transferred to Wilderness Heights at Olalla. By this point, both were gravely weakened. Before their departure from the apartment, Linda Hazzard's solicitor had arrived with newly drawn documents. Wills bearing the names of Dorothea and Clare Williamson, directing that Mrs. Hazzard should receive an annual allowance from their estate, and granting her responsibility for their funeral arrangements should they predecease her. It is said, though the precise manner by which the message was sent remains unclear, that one of the sisters managed to send word to Australia, where their childhood governess, Miss Margaret Conway, was residing. The telegram communicated urgent need. Miss Conway did not hesitate. She boarded a ship. By the time Miss Conway arrived in Vancouver and made her way to Seattle, she was met by Samuel Hazzard. He told her that Clare Williamson was dead. He escorted her to the mortuary. She looked at the body and did not recognize it. The woman before her bore no resemblance to the Clare she had known, vibrant, healthy, full of life. The figure in the mortuary weighed, according to subsequent testimony, less than 50 pounds. Miss Conway was then taken to Olalla to see Dorothea. What she found there, a woman whose bones protruded so severely that she was unable to sit without pain, housed in a single-room outbuilding resembling a garden shed, constituted the discovery that would, at last, set the machinery of the law in motion. The medical examination of Clare Williamson's remains confirmed what Miss Conway's eyes had already communicated. The cause of death was starvation. The body weighed less than 50 pounds. Testimony presented at the subsequent inquest and trial established that the diet administered during the weeks of treatment had consisted of minimal quantities of tomato broth and occasional orange juice, insufficient by any medical standard of the period to sustain a living person for the duration imposed. Dorothea Williamson, removed from Wilderness Heights by Miss Conway with the assistance of her uncle, John Herbert, weighed less than 60 pounds at the time of her departure. She was, according to those present, delirious and barely able to communicate. Mr. Herbert had been required to pay $1,000 to Linda Hazzard before she consented to release his niece into his care, a sum presented as payment for outstanding treatment fees. Miss Conway had found, during her time at Wilderness Heights, that Linda Hazzard was wearing one of Clare Williamson's dresses. She noted that the sisters' jewellery and personal possessions had passed into Mrs. Hazzard's keeping. The investigation that followed the complaint made to the British Vice-Consul in Tacoma by Mr. Herbert and Miss Conway revealed the existence of the wills that had been drawn up during the sisters' treatment. Examination of these documents by the prosecution would later establish that signatures upon legal papers associated with the estate appeared to have been forged. Dorothea Williamson survived. She recovered sufficiently to provide testimony. In August of 1911, Linda Burfield Hazzard was formally arrested and charged. The Kitsap County authorities had, it was recorded, been reluctant to pursue the matter on grounds of expense. It was ultimately Dorothea Williamson herself who agreed to fund the prosecution. If you're finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history. We also read every comment, so let us know your thoughts on this case below. Now, let's continue. Linda Hazzard was taken into custody in August of 1911. She denied wrongdoing entirely and characterized the proceedings against her as an assault upon natural medicine by a hostile medical establishment. Her defense, even in these early days before trial, was one of ideological conviction rather than factual dispute. The charge formally laid was that of manslaughter in the death of Clare Williamson, a British national. The trial was set to open in January of 1912 at the county courthouse in Port Orchard, Washington. The trial of Linda Burfield Hazzard opened in January of 1912 at the county courthouse in Port Orchard, Kitsap County, Washington. The case attracted considerable attention, not only from the local press but from newspapers across the United States and in Britain, where Clare Williamson's death had already been reported. The defense presented its position early and held to it without variation. Linda Hazzard's legal representatives told the press that the medical establishment was conspiring against their client, motivated by professional resentment of a practitioner who could achieve results that credentialed physicians could not. They maintained, further, that those patients who had died under her care had arrived already gravely ill, and would have perished regardless of the treatment administered. The prosecution answered with evidence. Medical experts took the stand and addressed the court in terms that were both precise and damning, discrediting the fasting method as practiced at Wilderness Heights and establishing that starvation, not pre-existing illness, was the operative cause of Clare Williamson's death. Prosecutors laid before the jury the documentation surrounding the Williamson sisters' estate, the wills drawn up during the period of treatment, the signatures upon legal instruments that the prosecution characterized as forged, the transfer of the sisters' personal possessions and jewelry into Linda Hazzard's possession. This, they submitted, amounted to a calculated program of financial extraction conducted alongside and through the administration of fatal treatment. Dorothea Williamson, recovered now to a degree sufficient for public testimony, gave evidence for the prosecution. Her account of the weeks at Wilderness Heights, the deteriorating physical condition of herself and her sister, the isolation, the drawing up of the wills, the atmosphere of control that pervaded the property, was recorded with attention by the court. Linda Hazzard took no responsibility. She considered the proceedings an attack upon her personally and upon the principles of natural medicine more broadly. John Ivor Haglund, whose wife Daisy had died in 1908 while under Mrs. Hazzard's care, testified for the defense. He stated that he retained faith in her methods and did not hold her responsible for his wife's death. The jury withdrew to deliberate. they returned. Linda Hazzard was found guilty of manslaughter. The presiding judge sentenced her to a term of between 2 and 20 years of hard labor at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. Her medical license was revoked. Silence fell across the courtroom. She served less than 2 years. On the 26th of December, 1915, Linda Hazzard was released from the Washington State Penitentiary on parole. The following year, Governor Ernest Lister granted her a full pardon, on the condition, it is recorded, that she remove herself to New Zealand. She and Samuel departed. In New Zealand, she practiced as a dietitian and osteopath, and, it was reported, made considerable money. In 1917, a Wanganui newspaper noted that she held a practicing certificate from the Washington State Medical Board, a claim that was, at minimum, misleading in its implications. The following year, she was charged in Auckland under the Medical Practitioners Act for practicing medicine without registration. She was found guilty and fined £5 plus costs. By 1920, she had returned to Olalla. Her medical license remained revoked. The establishment she opened was therefore designated publicly as a school of health rather than a sanitarium. It operated. Patients attended. Fasts were supervised. The institution functioned for 15 years until, in 1935, it burned to the ground. It was never rebuilt. 3 years later, in the late months of 1938, Linda Hazzard fell ill. She was by then in her late 60s. In the manner consistent with her convictions, she undertook a fast as a course of treatment. On the 24th of June, 1938, she died. She was 70 years of age. The cause was starvation. The number of patients who died under her supervision across the full span of her career has never been definitively established. Estimates recorded by historians range between 20 and 40 individuals. 15 deaths are directly attributed to her by name in available records, among them Clare Williamson, Earl Edward Erdman, Ivan Flux, and Daisy Maud Haglund, the mother of the man who would later found the well-known Ivar's restaurant chain in Seattle, a fact that history has chosen to preserve whilst the manner of her death faded quietly from common memory. Dorothea Williamson recovered. She returned to England. On the 7th of May, 1914, she married the Reverend Wyndham Allen, a chaplain. 3 months later, her husband drowned. She did not marry again. She lived until the 2nd of January, 1945, dying at the age of 72. She had survived Wilderness Heights by 34 years. The records of the Kitsap County Courthouse retain the documentation of the trial. The property at Olalla, which the local community once called Starvation Heights without any irony, has passed through time as such places do, altered, quieted, absorbed back into the landscape of fir trees and cold water and low Pacific sky. In the ledger, the names remain.